Oh, I wasn't here yesterday. That's why.
Where we were yesterday was that South Vietnam seceded from Vietnam. Very similar, by the way, to the American Civil War, right? The South secedes. There's an economic difference between North and South. There's an election that leads to the South seceding. Again, am I talking about U.S. history or Vietnamese history? I'm talking about both. And the South sets up their own government, but a lot of people, this is where that there was a significant percent of the Southern Vietnamese population who did not want South Vietnam to secede, and so they actively fought to overthrow the South Vietnamese government. That was the Viet Cong. So the Vietnam War starts with the Viet Cong taking on the South Vietnamese government. The Viet Cong was helped by the North Vietnamese, so that's their puppet master. The South Vietnamese government was held by the Americans. But then Gulf of Tonkin escalates American involvement because Americans claimed that North Vietnamese attacked them directly, which led to this. This is the escalation of the Vietnam War. It was called Operation Rolling Thunder. That is a huge aerial plane. It's one of the biggest ever. I bet Soren knows what it was.
I can't remember the name of that one.
Just make it up, we'll all believe you.
Flying Fortress.
No, not like that was B-52 Stratofortress.
Okay. That is a big old plane, and each one of those is a 500-pound bomb.
500 pounds?
Yeah. And there were enough bombs, fun little fact, there were enough bombs dropped in Vietnam during the Vietnam War for every person in Vietnam. One per person. And yet we will discover that it really doesn't matter. It's not, you can't win a war over whether or not people like communism with more weaponry. You can't force an opinion, which is what the Americans were trying to do in part. So the escalation of the war goes from Viet Cong taking on South Vietnamese to Americans bombing North Vietnam as punishment for, well, really two things. One, you attacked us. Now that's disputed. Did they really? They claim it never happened. And then two, the North supporting the Viet Cong in their attempt to overthrow the South Vietnamese government. Are you with me? You follow? Okay. Do you understand?
Is dumb.
What? Yeah.
They're all.
That's all I got.
One part of Indochina.
What? What?
That's one part of, is that considered Indochina?
Yeah, that's Indochina.
Yeah,
Yep.
so one country of Indochina falls there.
Well, now, when you say falls, what do you mean?
We get their influence, like we get influence over
Not quite.
that. Or the communists.
Communism. Okay, so we're going with communism. What we're going to try and answer, what each one of you could answer as far as your 6th Blue Book essay is, what was Vietnam all about? And there were two competing versions. If I were you, would really start listening to me right now. It's generally a good rule. What was the Vietnam War all about? There were those that said it was a war about preventing the spread of communism. As evidence, they pointed to this theory. It's called the domino theory. If you allow Vietnam to become communist, then Laos will become communist, and then Cambodia will become communist, and then Thailand will become communist, and then, God forbid, the Philippines will become communist. The Philippines, which by this point is an independent country with strong American influence there, and then Australia, Indonesia. My God, how do you stop those dominoes from falling? You stop the first domino from falling. So that's why America is there.
Who's the first domino on the chart?
Korea, right? So put those glasses on. The glasses that says the Vietnam War is all about, it's a global conflict. And Vietnam's simply a battle It should be called the Battle of Vietnam. And it's part of this bigger thing called the Cold War. So that's a pair of glasses. Now take those off and put on another pair of glasses that says, no, the Vietnam War was a civil war. It was a civil war. And we simply replaced the French in an effort to colonialize the Vietnamese and make sure that they were under our sphere of influence. And we should have been supporting the Vietnamese in their efforts to become an independent country. And rather than, that's what this was about, independence. And then the United States was on the wrong side. We should have been helping them. That's another pair of glasses. What was Vietnam all about? Okay. This will make more sense in about 15 minutes. Okay. Everyone understand that? This is the bar graph, which you might use as evidence in like a blue against or something. American soldiers in Vietnam. This starts around 1959. This is 1970.
Doesn't it say the dates right
This
there?
is 19.
Oh, yeah.
1968.
68, okay. At one point, we had 530,000 American soldiers in Vietnam. Why? Well, to make sure that Vietnam did not become a communist country, to make sure that they were in our sphere of influence. Vietnam was a weird war. And let me explain one of the reasons why Vietnam was such a unique challenge. And that is, let's go back to the American Civil War, right? Here's the Union Army, there's the Confederacy. The Union Army will capture land, make sure that the local population is submissive, make sure there's a supply line maintained, capture land. In other words, there's a front. There's always a front. World War II, there was a front. Here come the Allies, there go the Germans. Front. Vietnam had no front. There was no front in Vietnam. So where's the enemy? The enemy is everywhere and nowhere because it's the Viet Cong. They can be anywhere. The Viet Cong could be anywhere. So there's no front. Vietnam was measured in body count. How many did we kill today? Every day on the news, this many communist soldiers were killed. This many Americans were killed. It was all about body count. And we needed to make sure they lost more than we did, which, by the way, not even close. By the end, 50,000 Americans died. Something like 250,000 South Vietnamese died. About 2 million North Vietnamese died. Now, by that measure, we won. They lost more than we did. But back to reality, we didn't. We did not. So it was just an unusual war as far as there's no front. Okay? This is a big idea that I'm now showing you. It's not even necessarily something that you need to memorize. I just think it's kind of interesting. And it goes with the premise that an ally of America becomes the enemy in the next war. Right? So we're with this group, and then we realize we've just created our next enemy for whatever reason. So, for example, in World War II, the enemy was Germany. The problem was fascism. Our ally fighting our common problem was the Soviet Union. And the problem with our ally was they believed in this thing called communism, which leads to the next great conflict, which was the Cold War. The enemy was the Soviet Union, our former ally. The problem was communism. And during the Cold War, we allied ourselves with this group called the Mujahideen because we both didn't like communism. Now, the problem with the Mujahideen was that's Al-Qaeda. But they didn't like communism, so we allied ourselves with them during the Cold War. Well, that leads us to the next great conflict, which is the one we're in right now, where our former ally becomes our next enemy, and there's the problem, and we ally ourselves with these dictatorships. This could be Pakistan, it could be Saudi Arabia. We have a common enemy, and that is radical Islam. So we ally ourselves with these dictatorships because of this common problem. I mean, does that mean that World War V will be against Pakistan, China, Saudi Arabia, these oppressive governments? Do you have a question?
No, I was just wondering why you put World War IV.
World War IV, yeah.
It's like you think it is, or like.
Well, in this class, we will, those of you who took World War Conflict, you know this. But in this class, we're going to define what does World War mean? What does that mean? A world war is a war of isms. A war of isms, right? World War I was a war over empiricism, right? European empires. World War II was about fascism. World War III was about communism. World War IV is about radical Islamism. Work with me. And so that's what a world war means. It's a war of ideas, right? Here's my idea of the way the world should be versus what your idea of the way the world should be. Okay. Just kind of an interesting chart. All right, guess what? Only one more slide. Only one more slide.
So what are we gonna do after that?
Okay. So I assume that you know that Vietnam was not a great war. It didn't go well. It's not perceived like World War II, where clearly the Nazis were the bad guys and we were the good guys. Vietnam, it's great. And partly it's because the Vietnamese kept saying to the United States, why are you fighting us? We just want what you got, independence, right? This is a war about self-rule. And the Americans kept saying, no, this is a war about communism. If you just would let go of communism as a viable economic system, we'd be good. And the Vietnamese response was, yes, we're about communism. Who cares? Don't you want us to be an independent country like you against a European foe, the French? And now you've replaced them. No, that's not what this war is about. You see, what's Vietnam all about? Okay. One of the interesting things about Vietnam War was the U.S. never lost a major battle in Vietnam. Never lost a major battle. And yet somehow it's like, how do we lose? What happened? And in 1990, so the Vietnam War ended about 70-ish, about 1970. About 25 years later, these old fart Americans went to Vietnam and met these old fart Vietnamese who they had fought against, right, during the Vietnam War. Now they're old. And the Americans said, how did we lose to you? Like, we never lost a battle to you guys. How did we lose? And the Vietnamese said, yeah, you did. You lost the Battle of America. You lost that battle. You know, and the Americans were like, well, Battle of America? There were no battles in America. Oh, yeah, there were. There were battles in America. Not gun battles. The Americans lost this battle. Anyone recognize this picture? You do? You recognize it. Okay. This is in Ohio. Did you know there was a battle in Ohio? That was part of the Vietnam War. Now, there were no Vietnamese soldiers there. There weren't generals that were, sending left flank and right flank crap. But something happened here. So this is Kent State University. This is a college campus. Yep, 4 people shot and killed. So you should know that during the Vietnam War, there was a draft, right? What does that tell you about the popularity of the Vietnam War? Not very popular. Okay. Now you have to be careful because you can't automatically say that means it was a bad war because World War II had a draft too. So are you saying that World War II wasn't a justifiable war? Let's be careful there. But students by the thousands refused to go to Vietnam. They burned their draft cards. By the thousands protested on college campuses. One of the largest in the nation was at the U of M. Huge protests against the Vietnam War. Because college students were saying, why are we there? What are we doing? Why aren't we supporting the Vietnamese in their efforts to become an independent country just like we are? Why are we there? Another huge, in fact, there was a bombing at Madison. Any of you going to Madison in 2 years? Careful. Anyway, Kent State University, huge protests against American involvement in Vietnam. So large that the security on campus closed the campus, told everyone, go back to your dorm rooms, go back to your houses. We're shut down, go home. And a group of students refused to, like a bunch of students, hundreds, thousands. We're not going. We have a right to protest. We're going to do this. So martial law. The governor of Ohio institutes martial law and calls out the Ohio National Guard, who marches onto campus and shoots and kills 4 college students. And somebody captured this picture, right? So this young college student, and right in front of her is a dead college student, one of the 4. That picture ran in every major American newspaper the next day. How does that look? Not good, right? Here we are, we're trying to sell the American public that what the United States military is doing in Vietnam is good and right. And then this picture that shows American soldiers shooting Americans the next day. And what did these Americans do? Their First Amendment right to protest, assemble, speak. What are they guilty of? They're guilty of being an American. Now, I'm not here to say that is absolutely the accurate portrayal, because after all, they did shut down the campus. These people were supposed to go. Martial law was instituted. I'm telling you what it looked like. And as always, perception is more important than reality. Do many of you recognize this very sad picture? Maybe you know what it is? Why don't you know what it is? This is the My Lai Massacre. Heard of it? My Lai Massacre? My Lai is a little village in Vietnam. An American Army unit under the command of a guy by the name of William Calley. So William Calley's about your age, a little bit older, 26, something like that. And his job was to go into that village and find all the Viet Cong. Go in there and find all the Viet Cong. All right, good luck, right? You march into a village, any Viet Cong here? And the Viet Cong are playing cards like, damn it. All right, you got us. My Viet Cong badge, right? Viet Cong. Nope. Right? How are you supposed to tell who Viet Cong are? In William Calley's mind, in the American military's mind, there was one sure way to make sure that they got all the Viet Cong. Guaranteed. Kill everybody. Kill everybody. He ordered his men to line up the Vietnamese in this ditch and just shoot everybody. And they did. They did. I mean, you'll notice that. Look at that dangerous Viet Cong member right there. That little Viet Cong monster. And look at that Viet Cong monster right there. Right? These are obviously Viet Cong. You know I'm being sarcastic, right? Okay, good. They killed something like 500 men, women, and children. Right? The men are off fighting. The soldiers are gone. Who's left in this village? These people. And the amazing thing is the photograph even exists. Right? Like, who took this picture? I'll tell you the story. What happened was a helicopter pilot was flying over, saw what was going on, landed his helicopter between the Americans and the Vietnamese. And now you're that American with that gun. Now you want to keep going. You have to shoot that American that's suddenly in the way. So he saved who knows how many people. And then news got out that something bad had happened, and people showed up the next day, including this photographer. This appeared in every major newspaper. How does that look? Look what American soldiers are doing. They're shooting Americans for voicing their First Amendment rights, and they're shooting little babies. What are we doing? And again, I am not here to say that this is 100% reality. It doesn't matter. This is perception. This is what it looks like is happening. Okay? The American public is concluding we are shooting Americans for voicing their opinion, and we're shooting babies. This is wrong. Okay? Our third sort of strike is something called the Pentagon Papers. Have any of you ever heard of the Pentagon Papers? Does anyone know what it is? Are you aware that the Vietnam War spilled into neighboring countries? Did you know that? Spilled into neighboring countries? does anyone know? I bet someone knows this. How did North Vietnamese get to South Vietnam? Well, that's probably true, but what was the name of the path? Okay. Well, I'm going to do an absolutely terrible drawing of Vietnam.
That's pretty cool.
It's close to the Germany and France and Belgium.
That's the same idea. You just synthesized.
Oh, let's go.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Colby Hogan's first example of synthesis all year.
The American defense would be right here, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that make sense to defend the border? But I already told you there was no border.
They just go around.
They went around. So whatever country this is, that country is going to be drawn in because when the Americans find out that this path exists, they're going to bomb the snot out of that path. This is a country called Laos, and down here is a country called Cambodia. The path was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Ho Chi Minh Trail. Okay? It's the path that North Vietnamese used to sneak into South Vietnam. And the Americans found out about it. So they bombed the snot out of Laos and Cambodia. And of course, Laos and Cambodia kept saying, why are you bombing us? Why are you bringing the war to our country? And our response was, well, because there's a trail there. Right now, how does that look? We're the ones spreading the war. Remember the domino theory? Here it is. And it argues if you let Vietnam fall, other countries will fall. But in a weird sort of warping of the, a weird sort of warping of the domino theory, we're the ones who spread it to other countries. We bombed Laos and Cambodia. Cambodia, that's sort of the civil war in Cambodia, which led to a communist government taking over in Cambodia. But who caused that?
We did.
Well, you could argue we did. That, by the way, please recognize I am making an argument right now. I'm making an argument that the U.S. did a bad job of selling what this war was about because of that and that. And this was all secret, by the way. This is called the secret war, right? The secret bombing of Laos and Cambodia. But someone found out about it. Someone found out about it and gave it to the New York Times. And the New York Times had this report that there was bombing going on in these countries and was going to print it. But went to the U.S. government first and said, hey, we're about to print this story. Do you have any comment? Do you have any comment about what's going on? And the comment was, yeah, you are not printing that story. And went to the Supreme Court and basically said, you can't allow the New York Times to print this. Any of you recognize, you know who Julian Assange is? Does anyone, you don't know, do you know what WikiLeaks is? A few years ago, a guy by the name of Julian Assange stole a bunch of information from secret archives in the Pentagon, the U.S. military, and published it. Published it all. And then he fled because the U.S. government wanted to arrest him. And right now he's under arrest in Britain, and British are trying to extradite him back to the United States. And his argument is, of course, I can do that. It's free speech. I can do that, which is what the New York Times said. Yeah, we were given this information secretly, but we can print it. It's free speech, First Amendment. And in the ruling, 6-3, the Supreme Court agreed with the New York Times and said, go ahead, print it. And when the U.S. government said, but they stole the information. So what? Public information. They need to know it. And so this was reported. How does that look? Answer, not real good. Yes, dear.
So if you're writing about U.S. and America for the paper, you could use this to say that Americans didn't help foreign affairs.
You bet. That photograph, that is a known member of the Viet Cong. That is the police chief of the largest city in South Vietnam. The moment before this happened, the guy on the right, your right, was led up to the police chief, and the people leading up said, hey, we just got this Viet Cong guy. The sergeant said, that's a Viet Cong guy? Uh-huh. Bam. Shot him right in the head. And it was captured on film, right? The American photographer said that when he heard the shot, he just and got the picture. By the way, it's also on video. So if you're bored tonight, it's right there on YouTube. It's incredibly depressing. That picture was put into the newspapers. How does that look? This is the guy that's on our team. Was this guy given a trial? Was this guy put into a prison? Was he a prisoner of war? Nope, he was executed. Bam. That is the guy that we're supporting? How does that look? Real bad. Okay. And if you recognize this guy, you might recognize him if he wore a dress because he was a known cross-dresser. But that is J. Edgar Hoover. Ever heard of J. Edgar Hoover? He was the head of the FBI. Head of the FBI. And the reason he is on this slide is because he ran a program called COINTELPRO. Counterintelligence Program. Did you know he had Elvis spied on? Martin Luther King? The Beatles? Spied on him. Anybody that ever raised a voice against the Vietnam War, he had them spied on. And of course it was found out. How does that look? Americans are spying on fellow Americans for expressing their constitutionally given right to speak their minds. Americans are killing students, killing babies, spreading the war to neighboring countries, executing people, and spying on American citizens. What the crap? What the hell? And finally, our last bit of note-taking for today is two things. This is South Vietnam. All the red dots represent one single day, a simultaneous attack that took place on one day. It was called the Tet Offensive. Any of you ever heard of it? Tet Offensive? Tet is a holiday. It's like Mother's Day here. So here we celebrate Mother's Day. There they celebrate something called Tet. I have no idea what it's in reference to. Beats me. It's irrelevant. What's relevant is this attack took place at the same time throughout South Vietnam. From the top to the bottom, on the same day, a simultaneous attack by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. And the question, of course, is how could this possibly happen if the war was going as well as the U.S. government was claiming? If we're kicking their butt all over, how did they do this? Conclusion was the U.S. government is lying to us. So we're killing college students, we're killing babies, we're spreading the war to foreign countries, we're executing people, we're spying on American citizens, and we're lying to the American public. No wonder Vietnam became an incredibly unpopular war. So we'll have to, starting next Monday, start thinking about the American withdrawal from Vietnam. The last thing you're writing down is something called the War Powers Act, passed at this time. The War Powers Act has never been successfully used, but it does exist. The War Powers Act says that the president needs permission from Congress if he sends soldiers to other countries. You need permission from Congress. Right? When did we declare war in Vietnam? As a matter of fact, when's the last time the United States declared war? Right now, 2019, looking back, when was the last time the U.S. declared war? World War II. We declared war on Bulgaria. That's the last time the United States declared war. Is that the last war we've been in? Obviously not. Right? We fought in the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and later on in this class, we're going to study the Persian Gulf War and the Second Persian Gulf War and the invasion of Afghanistan. Obviously, the United States has been in several wars, but we don't declare war anymore. That's a flaw. I know this is sacrilegious, but I'm going to say it. That's a flaw in our Constitution. Yes, our Constitution has flaws. And one of them is it does not accurately address when the president, who's the commander-in-chief, and sends soldiers to foreign countries, but there's been no declaration of war. So how do we handle that? And this was an attempt when the president sends soldiers to Vietnam, you need to ask permission from us. And basically what the president at that time said, so this is Johnson, and later on Nixon, said, no, I'm not doing it. No. Right? He rose it. And it's never been answered whether this law is constitutional. It's never been answered. As a matter of fact, synthesis time. Right now, did you know that right now the United States is supporting one side right there, in that country right there, that red country right there, that's called Yemen. There's a civil war going on in Yemen right now. And the United States is supporting one of the warring factions. Congress, about a month ago, passed a resolution saying we need to stop that. And of course, Trump vetoed it. And yesterday, it did not override the veto. And what the Congress did was say, hey, Mr. President, you need our permission. We do not give it to you. And he vetoed it and said, I don't have to obey this law. The law is unconstitutional. You can't tell the president what to do with soldiers. I'm the commander in chief. You are not. So the question continues. Okay, any questions?
What are we doing now?
What you're doing now is clearing everything from the top of your desk. No phones, no pens, no notebooks, nothing.
Sorry for the
Nothing on your desk.
Ella
Clear.
Risto to the office, please. Ella Risto to the office.
You cannot have a pen, you cannot have a pencil, no phones, nothing on your desk. You're not being given a test, just relax.
Are these the documents for the?
I am giving you access to the documents that you will be using for essay number 6. You get to look at them and start figuring out what these things say. I will help you a bit. The first set of documents, pages 1 and then the back of page 1, is all about the Vietnam War. And the argument that you could answer for the first choice is, what was Vietnam all about? Was it a war about communism? Or was it a war for independence? And you've got documents making various claims. And the reason I'm giving this to you now is this stuff is fresh in your mind. So you should be able to sort of make sense of these documents. But I don't want you to have a pen or a pencil or a phone, because a phone has a camera. And none of you would do this, I'm sure, but let's just take away the temptation of having you take pictures of this stuff. You can group together and start kind of looking at this together. I will be retrieving these from you personally. Do not say, oh, I put it on your desk. Don't do that. I will have all of you sit back down and I will take it from you personally. Your copy that I'm giving to you right now, that's the one I'm retrieving from you by the end of the year. Okay. There is also a second option, and that's whether or not Reagan was a good president, which is fine. You can start attacking that one as well. I would just invite you to consider that maybe you should look at the Vietnam one because we just were covering Vietnam. That's why I want you to have access to this stuff.
It's in Schweiker and Allen.
Oh yeah, it's your old friend Schweikert and Allen.
Aw.
Oh,
they're back.
What about Zen?
I memorized it all, I'm gonna write it all.
You're amazing.
I'm gonna sell copies. I have a photograph of them.
I would not buy it.
Me neither.
Right, guys, you memorized that.
You're gonna
I'll
do
memorize
bad.
that.
So you do have about 15-ish minutes to dive into this bad boy.
So then,
Sometimes we were doing it.
Generally, I'll do this on Fridays.
every Friday until this test.
3 Fridays.
Awesome now. Okay.
I'm gonna fail anyway, so it's okay.
You are not going to fail.
Yes, I am.
You'll do